Hi everyone, so in this video we are going to discuss official language, and when I am saying official language I am not necessarily referring to the 8th schedule. The first thought that comes into your mind whenever somebody says the official languages, the first thing that UPSC parents start thinking about, that is 8th schedule and 22 languages they start recalling. Although that 8th schedule is also going to be part of this particular video, but besides that we'll be discussing about other things as well. So what would be the other things? So when I am talking about official languages in this particular video, I will be talking about part 17 of Indian Constitution, which spans from article 343 to article 351. So I'll be talking about what will be the official language of union, how a union is going to communicate between the ministry, what the contracts when it will be signing any kind of agreement. So whatever documentation that goes into union, right, parliament, so what kind of communication, what language it will be communicating with these contractors, or any kind of award if it is designing, or any kind of communication, inter-ministry communication, interdepartmental communication. So what language it will be using, the union will be using. Then we'll be discussing about the interlinkages, means how it will be communicating with the various states. So you do have Hindi speaking state, you do have English speaking state, then there are other regional languages as well. So how this union is going to communicate with that kind of state. Then we'll be talking about the official languages of the state. Then we'll be talking about the language that will be used into the proceeding, orders, decrees of High Court and Supreme Court. What powers does governor have in that relation, what powers parliament wield in all those relation. We do have certain high courts which does continue its proceeding in Hindi as well, despite the constitutional provision that constitution initially had envisioned that proceeding of the High Court and Supreme Court will be only in English. So which authority has been empowered by the constitution itself that can change it and can do it in Hindi or any other language. So all this discussion regarding the language of these important institutions, that is union, state and the judiciary, that we'll be talking about. Then there are certain directive principles, right, not directive principles as well, rather just one word, that is directive to the union for the promotion of Hindi, right. So that all these things, all these discussion we'll be doing in this particular chapter. Now without wasting time, let us move to the next slide and let us start discussing that what is going to be the outline, under what all verticals. Although the verticals has already been defined, that under what all verticals we'll be discussing this particular chapter, but as a formal discussion, let us have that on these 4 verticals, or in these 3 verticals largely we are going to have our discussion, right. So first of all, this vertical had not been discussed into the introductory section which I was delivering just a minute back, right. So first of all, we'll be discussing the debate into the Constituent Assembly. What debate went into the Constituent Assembly? You had this dominant language, that was Hindi, and when I am saying dominant, I do not intend to be imposing. Yes, I am from North India, but I do not want to seem like imposing. So what debate? You had this 39 to 40% around people, right, which was at the time when constitution was being framed, which was you had these 39 or 40% of the people which were speaking, whose mother tongue, who has chosen that our first language or the mother tongue is Hindi. The other close language was your Bengali, then Tamil, but all these languages were only in tune of 9% or 10%. So what happened means, Hindi, why Hindi could not be granted a national, when we were searching for that there should be a common language that could be granted a status of lingua franca, right. I hope you do understand the dictionary meaning of lingua franca, a common language through which all the country could be connected. So what factors went into which ensured that Hindi could not be granted, or Hindi would not be granted status of national language, why it could remain only official language of the union? So that debate we'll be discussing, and then we'll be discussing under this article 353 to article 351, whatever discussion that we had 2 minutes back, right. Official language of union, official language of state, then interlinkage language, or the language of communication between union and state, the language of judiciary, right, duties of union towards the promotion of Hindi. Then there are certain special directives. So all these things we'll be discussing under this second vertical, when we will be discussing this article 343 to article 351 that has been discussed in this part 17 of Indian Constitution. The later part, what is this part 18 dealing with? part 18 I guess is dealing with the emergency, right? And that part 18 we already have covered. And what is this languages in 8th schedule, that we'll be discussing as part of our third vertical. And as usual, there are 3-4 MCQ that has been appended at the end of this video that I'll expect you to attempt. So without wasting time, we have spent enough time on the introduction. Now without wasting time, let us start moving to the next slide and let us discuss this Constituent Assembly debate, right? So these are the articles and these are the subject matter that will be part of discussion in this particular. So you have these articles with the star, that is going to be very important, right? So these articles, rather one article, that is 351, and these 350 on this these are 2 articles as well, there should have been the star. So these articles, out of all these 9 articles that I expect you, 8 articles rather, that I'll expect you, that these articles, or if you cannot exactly remember the article, at least the subject matter of that article. We'll have a discussion on the subject matter of all these articles, but at least on these articles I'll expect you that you will have an expertise after covering this particular chapter. These articles are going to be very important from your exam point of view and general point of view, even if you are a general citizen, not a UPSC aspirant, right? So from that point of view as well, right, on all these, whatever polity topics that we are discussing, right, I expect that even a generalist, right, who may be a techie in nature, who may have an engineering background, right, and rather that has been my understanding, that even an engineer should get to read these kind of things. Yes, means his job is technical, right, he should be dealing with the computers, he should be dealing with the software, he should be like me, I have been in telecom, right, for very long, right? So my job is not to look into these arts kind of subject, and that has been the notion. But the evolving notion right now is that all the people should have an idea on that how countries polity run, what is this emergency provision, what is this fundamental right, what is these directive principles. So all these things are very common, right, and we should have a discussion, or we should have a knowledge and grip on all these things, right? So even if you are not a UPSC aspirant, right, even then, right, you should be reading. And even if you are or if you are a UPSC aspirant, you should try that. Does not matter whether you get into the service or do not read. See, my urge would be that whatever subject that you are reading during part of this UPSC preparation, be it history, be it polity, any subject that you are reading, right, do not read it just to clear the exam, right? That is the biggest mistake that every aspirant do. And the result would be कि जैसे ही आपका एग्जाम क्लियर हो जाएगा, you will start forgetting, because in the mind you had put that notion that I am reading all these subjects just to clear an exam, right? And the result would be again that those information would not be long lasting. So my urge would be, my request would be, whatever subjects that you guys are reading, does not matter whether you are preparing for UPSC or not, right? Read these subjects just to inculcate knowledge in yourself, just to have an understanding of that how Indian polity run, what is the history of India, how glorious or how bad, or what are the things that we can learn from Indian ancient history, what are the things that we should be learning, what regarding the administration or regarding the economy from the Mughal history, what are the things that we can learn from our modern history, what kind of values that we can imbibe from freedom struggle movements, right? Not only movement but leaders, Bhagat Singh, what inspired this leaders like Bhagat Singh or Subhash Chandra Bose to sacrifice their aspiring life, right? So these kind of values that we should be, so from this point of my urge would be that from this point, such kind of views, you should be reading these kind of subjects, right? So without wasting again the time, right, I have taken enough of the time on this particular slide. So this was part 17 that I had promised that we'll be discussing in this particular video. Besides that, there are 2 articles that is connected, although those 2 articles are not part of, and these 2 articles we already have when we were discussing this part 5 of Indian Constitution. What this part 5 of Indian Constitution deals with? Part 5 of Indian Constitution deals with the Union, right? And what this part 6 of Indian Constitution deals with? Part 6 of Indian. And on this particular point, what a particular part, whenever I enter into any part, any new part, I do emphasize that you do remember at least, right, all these parts. So part 1 to part 5, everybody, part 4, everybody remembers, right? Fundamental right, DPSP, citizenship, union and territory, right? But as far as other parts are concerned, part 5, part 6, part 7, part 8, part 9, and all these parts, anyway, we already Panchayati Raj, municipalities, right? So all these parts we already have discussed so far, right? So This Article 120 deals with the languages that will be used during the parliamentary proceedings, right? And this Article 210 deals with the language that will be used during the proceeding of what you call these state legislature. What are the powers that that particular house chair does have? So that has been discussed in Article 120 and Article 210. Article 210 Part 6 of Indian Constitution deals with the language that will be used in state legislature. Article 120 Part 5 of Indian Constitution that deals with language that will be used in parliament, right? And what power in that relation, right? What will be the language that in which members will be communicating, right? So that power rests with the speaker in the house or chairman in Rajya Sabha, right? They can, means head of the house can allow a particular member to communicate in. So all those things in the mother tongue, right? So all those things has been discussed in Article 120 in relation to the parliament, and Article 210. Many people do complain that I keep repeating things, but the purpose of, nobody is extraordinary, means 1 or 2 out of 1,000 people who are clearing this UPSC exam, or 900 odd people may be very extraordinary, like Vivekananda or like Kalidasa, who can remember things in just one go, but the kind of the humongous syllabus that UPSC does have, right? Nobody can exactly ensure that you would be able to remember. So yes, I do agree that by these repetition, video's length increases, but you can consider it as a revision measure, right? By continuously repeating the things, there was no necessity of discussing this Article 120 or 210, but still, just because these articles are connected, I could have also given, like other YouTubers or other channels, I could have also, I also want that my video should be reaching to far and wide, and due to lengthy nature of the video, people are choosing not, but at the cost of viewership. I do not care about these viewership and everything, right? My purpose is just to more and more benefit, right? I just want to attract only those students who are really serious. I don't want, at this point I already have raised many a times that UPSC is not a 2020, it is going to be a test match, right? So only those aspirants who are really serious, I want that these videos should benefit, right? If you are one of them who want that 20 minutes video or 30, the alternative I already have suggested you, that okay, videos may be 1 hour or 2 hour lengthy, so you can watch in a span, right? But again, I urge you that do not do that, right? If your urge is, if your sitting capacity is only for 20 minutes and 30 minutes, then let me tell you, sir, you or madam, right, you are not a real, right? You still need to develop the real guts to clear this UPSC, right? At least your seating capacity should be such that you can sustain your chair at least for 1.5 or 2 hours. Yes, breaks are necessary, and everybody capacity may differ, but at least 1.5 or 2 hours sitting, I don't think that any serious UPSC aspirant cannot have. So with that, we are entering into enough of the preaching today. Now let us move to the next slide and let us start discussing this Constituent Assembly debate, that why Hindi could not be granted this status of national language. Today we already know that Hindi is not national language, it is rather an official language of union. So what went, despite having this official numerical majority, Hindi at the time of independence was being spoken by around 31 to 41%, 39 to 41% of the people. So what went in, what discussion? We had started our discussion into the Constituent Assembly when Constitution was being framed to decide the national language. We were not choosing this official language. We had started our discussion that we should have a common national language. So what discussion went, what were the reasons that worked in disfavor or worked against Hindi, so that Hindi could not be granted the state, despite having, as I already have highlighted, that the next close language was Bengali to the Hindi, next closed language was Tamil, then other next language was Telugu, and all those, the numbers of people that were speaking Bengali or Tamil or Telugu were not even close to 10%. Their numbers stood around 9%, 8% or something like that. And there is, on another hand, you have Hindi that is being spoken by 39 to 41% of the people. So to understand that why, despite having this numerical majority, why, and I am talking about this, not talking about this absolute majority. Yes, Hindi did not have, for any language to be recognized as a national language, it should be widely accepted by all. So that was not something that happened, that was with the Hindi. Hindi was largely concentrated, or the first language into these 7 or 8 states into the northern India: Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, right? So all these states, 8-9 states combined, that contributed to the 39 to 40%. So first of all, the reason that worked in disfavor, that it was not the majority at the time of independence. If you can include all those states that were lying into this group A, group B, group C, group, there were around 28 states. Out of the 28 states, only 10 states were speaking into Hindi, right? And here, when constitution was being framed, see, at the political level, you can talk about this first past post system, right? So whosoever party or whichever candidate that secures most number of votes, he will be declared winner. But when you are discussing this sensitive issues like language, you cannot apply this first past post system. So the argument that I was extending to you guys, that despite having 39 to 41% of the people speaking to the Hindi heartland, this might seem like injustice, but try to understand, language has always been very sensitive in countries like India. See, if you want to be a country like Europe, any of the country like Europe, if you want to country of size like Germany or England or France, right, then you can raise these kind of issue, these kind of dividing issue. But if you want to be a country where you have multiple religion, you have multiple language, what is the one most important thing that we boast about our country? The most important thing is our diversity. Since our childhood, we have been talking about that we are a multi-religious society, we are a multilingual society, we are a multi-ethnic society. So this diversity which we have been beautifying, which we have been selling to the world, right? Why cannot we, while residing into the India, when we can sell this diversity to the world to represent our soft image, why we cannot respect this diversity when we are residing into India? Why this debate starts that Hindi should be imposed, right, or Hindi should be accepted despite having this numerical? See, when you are dealing with these kind of sensitive issue on which you had state divisions, right, in 1956, when the state or the Andhra which had been created, I'm not talking about the Andhra Pradesh, I'm talking about this Andhra, it was the first state creation was on the basis of language, right? You had many violent protests into 1960 to 1970 when Indira Gandhi has resolved this issue into the southern India. The most violent protest into the south in 1960 or 70 was centered around this language, right? Even you go to the states like Tamil Nadu, you go to the Kerala, you go to the Karnataka, you go to the Telugu, Andhra Pradesh, you will realize that how much language is important in their lives. They take very much pride into their language. Perhaps you living here in these 4 or 5 states may not be able to realize that how intense or how strong they feel about their language. They do take pride into their language, and when there is such sensitive issue, you cannot play with. And when especially, see, if you are talking about only numerical majority, when you are designing your constitution at that time, right, you cannot, when you are designing your constitution on the principle that we will be hearing even to the person who is sitting on the last bench or last line, does not matter how much numerical majority, whether irrespective of numerical majority, will be listening to everybody, will be taking care of minority, right? So in that situation, you cannot say it will be dictating something just by virtue of numerical majority. And this is a reality. See, English today is more, means again, I might be offending people belonging to, although my mother tongue also happens to be Hindi, just because I am delivering this lecture in English, I should not be taken. So I also do have this enchantment towards Hindi, but you will have to be very practical while dealing with these kind of issues. So let us try to understand. See, in Constituent Assembly, you had both sides of the people. You had people who are vouching that no, Sanskrit happens to be ancient language, it should be this, Sanskrit should be made this national language, right? You had people belonging for the Hindustani, you had people belonging for the Hindi. If you notice, in 1970 or 1920, you had Mahatma Gandhi, whose loyalty later shifted for Hindustani. And when I am saying loyalty shifted, right, I am not offending that personality, that great personality, but initially in 1917 or 1920, 17, I don't know, this pen is not working today. So 1970 to 1920, even he was in favor of Hindi to be recognized as a national language. But later, considering the change situation, in 1947, we had been divided on the religious lines, right? And at that moment Hindi, and the Hindi, the kind of Hindi that these group of people like Tandon, Purushottam Das Tandon or GB Pant, which they were vouching, right? They were not vouching for the Hindi that we do speak today generally, but the Hindi with the script of Sanskrit that they were talking about. And this demand had communal overtone, and at the time when our country had been divided on to the religious line, at that moment it was not possible to recognize Hindi in that particular format. And another reason that we already have talked about, that just numerical majority cannot be basis. If you have to determine the richness of any particular language, these are going to be a parameter to decide that how rich a particular language is and whether that language can be imposed or can be pushed as a national language around a nation or not. So lingua franca, whether to decide whether a language can be national language or not, whether that language happens to be a connecting language across that particular nation or not. So that is the dictionary word is lingua franca. So was Hindi lingua franca? No, at that moment it was not. You had the 5-6 state into the southern India, you already have cited. Then in northern East India as well, they were more comfortable in English rather than in Hindi, right? So it was obviously means Hindi was not a lingua franca. Then in terms of richness, if you notice, then Tamil and Bengali language were equally rich. If in terms of literature, if I talk about, so again in Tamil language you have this Sangama literature, right? The richness of Sangama literature, if you have read this ancient India, you will have an idea on that how rich this Tamil language or Tamil literatures are. Then Bengali or Telugu literature was equally rich. You have writers like Rabindranath Tagore, and in Bengal I'll have to appreciate in one term, in terms of art and in terms of academic, right? Bengali people happens to be very sound in terms of on these 2 points, that is arts and academics, due to this literature point, right? In terms of inter-ethnic link, if I talk about, so Hindi did not have linkages with this tribes like Khasi or Santali, right? So on all these parameters, if you notice, Hindi was at that moment of time, at time of independence, it was not capable that it could carry or it could convince all the people, right? And as long as consensus is not reached on any such sensitive issue, right, you cannot impose. That would have been the imposition over all the country, right? If you try to see another things, right, another things which went against the what you call Hindi, so you will notice that it was only 10 states in which this Hindi was being spoken out of 28 states. Although these 28 states, when I am talking about all those states into the group A, group B, group C and group D I am including, right? So only in another 18 states, if I talk about, so in another 18 states you have less than 10% of the people who were speaking into the Hindi. Then you have this opposition that we already have talked about from the southern state. Even today this opposition exists, right? They decided or they declared this Hindi to be chosen as national language as imposing and not imperialism, right? They also feared, the real reason was that they also feared loss into the central government, right? Then another reason, Hindi with Sanskritized script that we already have talked about, right? So the orthodox Hindi vouchers that they were talking about to be adopted Hindi into the Sanskritized version. Today the Hindi for the union, right, that we have adopted, that is in Devanagari format, right? Devanagari format. But what they were talking about, Hindi in Sanskritized, and that had communal overtones, and that demand could not be fulfilled, especially when the country at that time had been divided onto the religious lines. Because if we would have adopted Hindi into that Sanskritized script at that moment, our neighbor would have got the message to our Muslims that, hey, did we not say this, that these people are just working for the interest of caste Hindu? That was one this allegation of Jinnah against the Nehrus and Gandhi, right, on which this he had got this Pakistan, right? So this also ruled out, this reason also ruled out, this reason also ruled out. Not majority of people spoke Hindi language, only 39%. When I am saying not majority, I am talking about the absolute majority. Yes, numerical majority into the first past post system, but that does work. That first past post system does work only into what you call this political system, not on these kind of sensitive issues, right? So I hope what facts went against the Hindi. Finally, a deal was struck, and the deal was between this Hindi versus others. And this deal or the contract that I am talking about, this is a loosely used word that I am just using to make you understand. But this deal, the kind of deal that I am going to talk about, that has been mentioned into the constitution itself. When we will be talking this article 343, 344 and 351, you will notice the nature of this deal. So right now I am just letting you know that what actually happened. So see, try to understand whatever argument that so far I have presented that were against Hindi, right? That because it was not lingua franca, because it had competing literature into the Tamil language or Bengali language. So for that reason, because there was equally competing languages like Tamil or Telugu, you cannot, means you have to respect minority rights. But you will have to understand that yes, minority rights is important also, but when you have 39 to 40% of the people demanding something, you will have to respect their sentiments as well. So the settlement that was struck by the constitutional father, that was that okay, let states decide. As far as language of state is going to be, let those states, mean we respected the federal spirit, and respecting that federal spirit, right, it was decided that let these states decide that what will be their language. But as far as union language is going to be concerned, union's official language is going to be concerned, right, that we are making Hindi. And Hindi, what kind of Hindi? Hindi with not Sanskrit script, but in Devanagari script, right? That let official language of union be Hindi. As far as numerals are concerned, numerals will be in international format, right? Numerals, when I am saying in international format, the numerals that we use like this, right? Numerals in Devanagari would be 1 like this, 2 would be something like this, 3 would be something like this, 4 would be 4, 5 would be 5. So these kind of numerals you do have in Devanagari script. So as far as Hindi was concerned, right, this language, this kind of language, for this Devanagari script was chosen. As far as numerals was concerned, numerals was in international format, not in Devanagari format. So this was the deal. Along with, because you had given concession to various states that they will be communicating the language in their choosing or their understanding, another deal was that okay, means Hindi we have recognized at the union level to be official language, but whatever works, means until 1947, because we were under this British government, right, and all these things that we are discussing right now, we'll be discussing that thing in article 343 and 344 as well, right? I am just making you understand. So another deal was that okay, just because we have remained under the British, so whatever communication that we, our administrative department, central legislative assembly or state legislative assembly, that has been doing until now, whatever form, whatever contracts were being signed, whatever awards or whatever these bills that, or whatever ordinances that so far has been were being laid, that was completely in English, right? So although the inter-ministry communication will be in Hindi, in Devanagari script, right, and whatever works, even these regarding these acts and bill that will be presented into the various Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, that will go into the Hindi, but English will accompany whatever works that so far were being performed into the English, right? So Hindi, yes, we recognize Hindi as official language of union, but whatever work that was being performed until 1947 into the English, let that work continue in English until 1965, means for next 15 years, let that work also continue in English as well, because our administrative staff is not that much capable. When I am saying about administrative, these political class into the Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha that you see, they are just front end to whatever bill that is being presented or whatever draft or whatever work that goes into background. You do have hell big this administrative staff. So that was not equipped to deal all these things or to translate all these things suddenly at the stroke, right, into that Hindi and Devanagari. So a provision was made that for next 15 years until 1965, because in 1950 you had this operationalization of constitution. So for next 15 years, right, English will accompany this Hindi after 15 years it would be on to the parliament. So right now whatever we are discussing, that is constituent assembly decision, right? So let the future parliament decide that after 1965 Hindi would be dedicatedly be the official language of union, or Hindi plus English would be there. So right now it is Hindi plus English, but in 1965, after 1965, let parliament decide that whether English should be removed or not. Along with another concession that Hindi was given, that under Article 351 a provision was made, and that was a directive for the union, that union will work. In the meantime, in these 15 years, union will work, or union will create a department, and today we do have that department, that is Department of Hindi, under this Ministry of Home Affairs, and that directive is into the constitution for the promotion of Hindi. So union for next 15 years will work towards. So right now Hindi plus English we are continuing for the union, Hindi plus English. But in the meantime, will be doing, means union will have to attempt that how to reduce this usage of English and how to promote the interest of Hindi, right? How to convince these people who are protesting right now into the constituent assembly, right? How to convince, try to create an environment, inculcate these kind of Hindi language, or have the Hindi language into the syllabus of other states as well. Convince them at the political level, at the educational level, at the practical level. Convince them that hey, we have to, as a nation, we should be developing a lingua franca language in which all the nation, right, जो कि एक language जो कि हम सभी को जोड़ के रख सके. So that was the commitment of the constitution. Whatever right now that I am discussing, all these things is mentioned into the constitution. So that was the deal that was struck between, to convince these Hindi speaking people, right, that for next 15 years union will try to attempt to push this Hindi and to progressively bring down the usage of English, right? So that was the deal. So that was all about the constituent assembly debate. Now we are moving to the next slide. So agreement between Hindi and proponents of other language, and that agreement has been mentioned in this article 343, and that is language of union. So language of union was finally decided that the official language of union will be Hindi in Devanagari script, already discussed. The numerals will be international in form, but considering English pervasiveness, union was allowed to use English as medium of official communication in certain areas, right? What were those certain areas? So certain areas were those areas in which English was already being used, right? Until 1965. What will happen after 1965? So after 1965, Parliament by law to decide on the continuation or dropping of English, right? So after 1965, it is the Parliament which was empowered to take a call, right? But in the meantime, what was said that every 5 years, so when I am talking about the international format of the numerals, right, so I am talking about this format. This was in Devanagari that I had written, right, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I already have written. So this is the content of this article 343 that we already have discussed. Now article 344, again this article as well we already have discussed. Let us have the fact. So precedent at the end of 5 years and 10 years since commencement. So what it is talking about, that it will be the duty of president that after 5 years of the operationalization of constitution, that is our constitution was operationalized into the 1950s. So after 5 years means in 1955, and after 10 years, that is 1960, president will have to constitute a commission. What will be the commission be doing? So commission will be doing all these things. Commission will be looking into that how to progressively increase the use of Hindi, because to the Hindi people it had been committed in this article 343 that we will be ensuring in this 15 years time that we are taking, right, we will be ensuring that this Hindi becomes a common language. So the commission that will be constituted by the president after 5 years and after 10 years of the commencement of constitution, that is in 1955 and 1966, the job of that commission will be that they will be looking into that whether union is working progressively to increase the usage of Hindi for the promotion of Hindi or not, and this has been mentioned. The related article is 351 as well, that we will be discussing into the last section of area where continued use of Hindi can be restricted. So you have to bring down, you have to give recommendation that how to use, how to progressively bring down the usage of English and how to increase the usage of Hindi. Any other matters referred by the press. So that is going to be the job of this particular commission, that will be constituted not by the parliament, but that will be constituted by the president to check whether the union is working in that direction, whatever commitment that had been made in the constituent assembly, right? So just to examine those things, union will have to, president will have to constitute that commission. Now whatever report that commission will be preparing, that report will be looked in by a committee, and again that committee will be formed by that parliament, right? That will be a 30-member committee, of which 20 people will come from Lok Sabha and 10 people will be coming in from the Rajya Sabha. It will have membership from all party using the single transferable vote, right? To examine the report of this particular commission, whatever commission that president has constituted, they will prepare a report on these 3 terms of references, and that report will be examined by this a committee. So did that commission was commissioned, right? Whether that commission was commissioned or not. So in 1955 you will notice that as has been committed in 1955, that commission was constituted by the president, led by this B.Z. Khar, and the committee that we talked into the 3rd provision of this article 344, right? That committee was also instituted to look into the reports that was prepared in 1956. This committee had been instituted by president, and in 1957 this committee submitted its submitted its report, and this committee led by G.B. Pant inquire into the report. In 1960 as well, a similar commission had been promised by the constituent, but in 1960 you will notice that no commission was instituted by the president, right? Rather in 1963 you will notice that you will have this Official Languages Act. Now what changes this Official Language Act 1963 is going to bring, we will notice, right? So this Official Language Act 1963, one very noticeable and one very pertinent thing that it will be saying that the continued use of English into the union's official communication, right? Along with Hindi, whatever union is communicating between inter-ministry talk, interdepartmental talk, or any kind of contract that union is signing, or whatever communication that union is having, right? So that will be in Hindi, but English will accompany that thing. So that was one thing, because in 1960, and that was after, means in Official Languages Act, it was mentioned that it will continue even after 1965. Why 1965 year was flagged? Because Parliament in the Constituent Assembly into the Article 343, right, the first article that we talked about, in Article 343, it has been written that English will be continued alongside Hindi as official language until 1965, and after that 1965 Parliament will be deciding that what will be the status of English. So through this 1963, through this Official Language Act in 1963, Parliament has declared, right, its intent that English is going to be continuing language until this indefinite period, and even today this English is continuing along with Hindi. Yes, because in Article 343 you already have declared, means Constitution has already declared that the official language of Union will be Hindi, right? So Hindi is continuing, but along with English. So I hope you do have clarity on this Official Languages Act 1963, then Article 343 and Article 344, right? So Article 343 talked about the language of the Union, Hindi plus English. Then Article 344 talked about the institution of commission and committees, right? And this is the one provision. This is only one provision of this Official Language. There are other provision of Official Languages Act that we'll be discussing into the relevant article. Now we are moving to the next article, and the next article is Article 345. Article 345 is going to talk about the language of states, various states, right? So Article 343 language of Union, Article 344 committee and commission, Article 345 is going to be language of various states. So state, as I already told you, we are a federal country and we have been respecting this federal spirit of the country, right? So state was given this various states had been given independence, that whatever language that is being used into your state, right, you can choose any of the language as official language of your states. And today, if you see the situation, it is not only one language with which a particular state has decided to be official language of that particular state. A state can have more than one official language as well. But the constitutional provision, besides giving this independence, that state by a law, state legislature, when I am saying state, not state government I am referring, but state legislature. So state legislature by a law does have power that they can decide what will be the official language of that particular state. But until state by law, state legislature by law decides so, right, until they decide so, English will continue to be used, right. So in 1950 you had commencement of the constitution. So from 1950, suppose a particular state until 1965, it did not bring a law, any particular state called, let us say, Maharashtra. So Maharashtra until 1965, if it does not bring a law declaring that they, what will be their language, then in that case English will continue to be used as their official language. So that was one thing. State legislature may choose any of the language spoken in the state or Hindi. Here this point is very interesting, that state may choose any of the language spoken in the state or Hindi, right. So even if Hindi is not being spoken in their particular state, they do have right that they can. Besides, means whatever languages, so suppose in a particular state 5 languages is dominantly spoken, right. So either they can choose any of these 5 languages, or even if Hindi is not being spoken, if that particular state is enchanted by that national integration feeling, right, so they can choose Hindi as well. So this is a curious point, just to fulfill that commitment, or just to whatever commitment that we had made to the Hindi speaking people in this article 343 and 351 that we have not discussed so far, right. In 351, union will have responsibility to promote Hindi. So this attempt or this insertion is nothing, just union's attempt or the constitutional makers attempt to create a lingua franca, right. So state legislature may choose any of the language spoken in the state or Hindi as official language of the state. However, till the time state legislature makes any such decision, English shall continue as the official language of that particular state. So I hope official language of union and official language of state you will have clarity on. Now we are moving to the next article, and the next article would be article 346, and article 346 talks about the link between the language through which union and state will be communicating, and state at the horizontal level. So at the vertical level, how union is going to communicate with the state, or how a state is going to communicate with the union, in which language, and at the horizontal level, how various states are going to communicate, what languages they will be using. So if Maharashtra is talking to Bihar, or if Bihar is talking to Uttar Pradesh, or Uttar Pradesh is talking to the Rajasthan, what language they will have. So might be that Maharashtra may not be comfortable with the language or the official. So suppose Bihar has decided Maithili to be their official language, and Maharashtra some other language is being used. So whatever language that Bihar will be using or having communication to the Maharashtra, right, because right now you have this Bihar and Maharashtra feud ongoing over this CBI issue, right. So what will be the language? So that has been settled in this article 346, and not in article 346 exactly. See that, so whatever that has been mentioned into the whatever provision that has been mentioned regarding this vertical communication and the horizontal communication, right, into the article 346, that today, means in 2020, stands redundant. And not only in 20, with the arrival of this Official Language Act 1963, the provisions regarding whatever point that we have discussed in relation to article 346 regarding this vertical and horizontal, that stands redundant, right, because Official Language Act 1963 has declared that, see, right now I am talking about this vertical communication, and then we will be talking about this horizontal communication. So whenever a state which has chosen Hindi as their official language, so H state means Hindi state, and union is communicating. So because union's official language is also Hindi, and that particular state's official language is also Hindi, so that they will be communicating in Hindi, and that is a provision that has been mentioned in this official language of 1963. Whenever a non-Hindi state like Meghalaya, if they are communicating with union, so they will be communicating with union in English, or if union is communicating with the that particular state, non-Hindi speaking state, so they will also be communicating in English. So I hope the vertical communication, how vertical communication will happen between union and state or state union, that you will have clarity on. In those two lines we will be discussing about the horizontal communication. So whenever a Hindi state, when I am saying Hindi state, I am again clarifying the state which has chosen their official language as Hindi. So whenever a Hindi state and a Hindi state is communicating, so you do have these four states like Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Madhya Pradesh. They have decided that whenever we will be communicating among each other, Hindi is going to be our common language. So whenever a Hindi state is communicating, Hindi is going to be their common language, and that is a provision that has been mentioned into what you call Official Languages Act 1963. And whenever a non-Hindi state or a other state, means non-Hindi state and Hindi state is speaking, or the other state, the state means, let us remove this Hindi. So whenever a non-Hindi state and a state again which may be speaking Hindi or other language, when they are communicating, so suppose Tamil Nadu, whose official first language of preference is Tamil, and say Bihar is speaking, right, they are communicating. So Bihar, for let us say Maithili, is their official language. So when they will be communicating, so whatever language, either they should mutually agree that whenever there will be communication between Bihar government or Tamil Nadu government, let us have communication in English. Either they should mutually agree to whatever agreement that they reach, right? So if they have reached that we will be communicating in English, right, then that's fine. But if they have not decided, and Tamil Nadu government, while writing letter to the Bihar, right, if they are using Tamil language, and now Bihar cannot understand this, right? So that will be accompanied by a English translation. Similarly, if Bihar, while writing letters to the Tamil Nadu government, if they are using Maithili, because their preferred language is Maithili and they would like their language to be promoted, so Bihar government will also have to ensure that that communication is accompanied by a English translation, right? So that is about the link language between the union and state, and that has been mentioned into these article 346. So we have discussed 343, 344, 345, 346. So all these four articles that we already have discussed. Now we have this article 347 that talks about special provision related to the language by a section of a particular population of a state. So let us take an example. Suppose Maharashtra, which happens to be a huge state, and it has declared two languages as their official language. Right now, a category of people or a class of people which are say 40 lakhs in number, their language they consider that their language is also very rich. They do have this rich heritage, they do have rich literature, and their language to be, if they feel that their language should also be included into the official language, and if their demand is just, right, if there is a merit, so they can request the president. They will not be requesting to the governor. They do have right that they can directly approach the president with their representation and can present their case. And in that case, if president is satisfied, right, if he is satisfied on a demand being made on that behalf, if president may, and if he is satisfied that a substantial portion of the population of a state desire to use any language spoken by them to be recognized throughout a state or a part of state, in that case president can direct a state that, hey Maharashtra, can you declare this language as also official language of your state? So that is something that has been mentioned in this article 347. Now we are moving to very important article, and that is article 348. Why I am saying this article is very important? Because this article is going to tell you two things. The first thing, that the language that will be used into the judiciary, and when I am saying judiciary, I am not referring to the entire integrated structure of the judiciary. I am just I'll be just taking these two structures, that is High Court and Supreme Court. So what will be the language that will be used into the Supreme Court and High Court? Again, there will be two categorization into the Supreme Court and High Court. The languages that they will be using as part of their proceeding. When I am saying proceeding, I am referring to how judge will be communicating with the advocate, how advocate will be communicating to the judge, or how judge will be communicating with the accused or victim. So that is called proceeding, part of proceeding, judicial proceeding. And another part of judiciary is that orders, how they'll be, in what language they'll be passing their orders or writs or any kind of statement that they are issuing, right? So that has been discussed in this article 348. And the second thing that has been discussed into this article 348, that what will be the language of the authoritative text. Now this authoritative text, what is this authoritative text? So authoritative texts are the bills that is presented into the house, the acts that is passed by the governor or the president. So all those bills, all those acts that is passed by parliament or the state legislature, those are called authoritative text. Any regulation that may be passed by the union government or the state government or the DM, so those are also called the regulations. Any ordinance that may be passed by the president or the governor, so those also becomes part of the authoritative text. So article 348 talks about the language of the judiciary, that is proceeding and their orders, and then these authoritative text, the language that will be used into this authoritative text. So because this article 348, right, talks about all these things, and that's why I call that this is going to be important. Can you recall three important articles that we have discussed, although we have discussed from 348 to 347, but let us recall three important articles of this particular chapter. Article 343, language of union; article 345, language of the state; and article 346, interlink or the link language between the union and state. And this article 348, right, that is going to be fourth important article of this part 17 that we are going to discuss, right? So article 348, as I already told you, it is going to the what will be the language of proceeding in Supreme Court and High Court. Then these things are called authoritative text. These things collectively is called authoritative text. So what will be the language of bills, acts presented, passed in or both houses by the parliament and the state legislature? What will be the language of ordinances, rules, bylaws, regulation passed by the parliament or the state legislature? So these things are collectively called authoritative text. So all these things, unless parliament, so here is the directive statement, unless parliament provides otherwise, right, all these things are going to be in English. So that was the constitutional stand. So unless parliament by a law decides, right, Supreme Court's proceedings, Supreme Court's order, High Court's proceeding, High Court's order, whatever acts or whatever bills that are being presented or whatever ordinance that president or governor is passing, right, so all these things that we have mentioned in these three lines, in these 3 points, are going to be in English. However, in the constitution, the second and the third provision itself, it has been mentioned that the state legislature will have power. What powers they will be having? That whatever languages that will be used in relation to the bills or acts, state legislature has been empowered that they can change it to their official language of their state or Hindi, right? However, if they are choosing that instead of English, so original provision is that English would be the language of the bills or what you call acts that is being passed by the state legislature. But if a particular state, suppose Bihar, chooses that Maithili will be the language of the bills or the acts, I am just taking a hypothetical example, in that case state legislature will have to ensure that it will be accompanied by an English translation. That is the only thing that a state legislature will have to do. The another provision that has been mentioned, that governor is empowered to change the language of proceeding of the High Court, right? Not the Supreme Court, but the governor does have power that they can, means governor of a particular state can change, can direct High Court of that particular state to change the proceeding. When I am saying proceeding, I am talking about the language of communication between advocate, the verbal communication, right? So language, and there are many courts, right? Uttar Pradesh High Court, governor has directed this Allahabad High Court that their proceeding will continue into the English. However, there is no direction into the constitution regarding the Supreme Court proceeding. And even today, currently if I talk about, and that might be, if you do not know, this information might surprise you, that whatever communication that advocate and Supreme Court does have or whatever communication that accused, even accused has to speak. So because accused cannot, many a times, in 90% of the time accused may not have proficiency over the language, that is English language. So on his whatever he will have to communicate with the judge, he will have to communicate through a lawyer, right? So that is the point. So even today the Supreme Court, see, High Court's orders and other things will be, the constitutional position was that how High Court's proceeding can be changed by the governor, the language of the proceeding, but as far as acts and decrees are concerned, sorry, orders of the High Court are concerned, that will continue to remain in English, right? But that was a constitutional provision. But Official Language Act 1963, what it is going to do is that it will empower governor to change even the language of the order that High Court will be passing, right? So governor, let us see that provision of Official Language Act. So Official Language Act of 1963 provided that even orders and decrees, right, that High Court is passing, right, and not the Supreme Court, can be changed from English to Hindi or any other language of the state with the previous consent of the president, right? So if a governor of particular state, let us say Bihar, again I am taking example of Bihar, right? So Bihar does have High Court in Patna High Court you do have. So governor of that particular state is empowered that they can direct High Court that, hey, whatever order that you are passing, right, you should be passing, instead of English, you should be passing that order either in Hindi or any of the official language of the Bihar, right? So that power, and this power of changing the language of the proceeding of the High Court has not been mentioned into the Constitution, rather it has been mentioned into Official Language Act 1963. However, there is no mention of any language change into the Official Language Act, either into the Constitution, regarding the Supreme Court, regarding their proceeding, or regarding the manner of order or language of order that Supreme Court will be passing, right? Only Parliament does have power, and so far Parliament has not enacted any particular law. And there is reasonable ground as well. You might argue that, hey, when we do have so many languages, why Supreme Court cannot operate in a particular language? Let us have a Hindi as a common language, because most of the masses does understand Hindi. So there is a logic. See, this will be like opening a Pandora box. If you will be demanding that Hindi should be Supreme Court's language, then why not Tamil? Again, the same debate will start. So just to ensure the uniformity into the Supreme Court language, it has been decided that its language will not be touched upon. Yes, High Court, because they operate at the transactional level into the state, so High Court was allowed, the governor was empowered that the governor can change this language of proceeding and can language of order as well. But in Supreme Courts, because Union did not, or the Constitution did not wanted to erupt that violent debate on the language again, and that's why this power has been given only to the Parliament and not to the any governor or not to any state legislature. And so far, because of these reasons of uniformity, reasons to maintain this uniformity and just to avoid any kind of clashes on to the sensitive issue of language, even Parliament have not touched this particular issue, right? So I hope the languages of the Supreme Court are language that will be used into the High Court in their order, or the bills or the acts, what languages. So on the bills front, on the acts front, we already have seen that the state legislature does have power that they can choose any of their official language or Hindi for their bills or the acts, right? So that Article 348 you will have clarity on. This Article 349, whatever contents that Article 349 does have, you can read when you will get PDF, because whatever content that this Article 349 does have, that has become redundant, so I am not reading that. I am directly jumping to this Article 350, and that Article 350 would be the language to be used into the representation or for redress of any grievance, right? So every person shall be entitled to submit a representation for the redress of any grievance that he or she may have to any officer or any authority of the union or state in any of the language used in union or state as the case may be. Or any officer cannot deny that, hey, you have used while representing or sending me representation or sending me any complaint in this particular language, right? Because it does not happens to be official language of union, or it does not have happens to be official language of state, so I am not going to accept your complaint, or I am not going to accept any representation. So that has been mentioned in this Article 350, and that is nothing thing, but this article 350 is a recognition of minority language rights, right? So it might be that a particular population's language, the irrespective of numerical minority, does not matter whether that particular language is being spoken by 60 people, 600 people or 6 million people. If a complaint is presented into the police station, or if a language or if a complaint is presented into any ministry regarding anything, any representation is being sent, that state authority or union authority cannot deny that representation, entertainment of that particular representation just on the basis of language, right? So that has been mentioned in this article 350. So article 350 is also very important. And why I am saying all these articles very important? Because this is about the sensitive issue of the language. Now, without wasting time, let us move to the next slide and let us discuss this article 351, and that is the last article of part 17 of Indian Constitution. And that this article 351 is going to impose a duty on union. What duty? So for the promotion of Hindi, right? So this thing we already have discussed, that in 1950s, when Hindi was not granted this status of national language, despite the numerical majority, of promise was made, and that promise has been eased in this article 351, and that promise is that it shall be the duty of union to promote the spread of Hindi language, to develop, right? It shall not only promote, but it should develop Hindi in a particular way, by taking vocabulary from other official languages as well, without affecting its original thing, right? Without affecting its original genus, right? To develop it so that it may serve the medium of expression for all the elements of the composite culture of India, and secure its enrichment by assimilating without, means it has to assimilate content from other official language as well, means union has to do something, or union has to devise some mechanism by which it will have to take vocabulary from the other official language, so that it could be enriched, so that it could be acceptable to other language, people speaking other language as well, they feel connected with the Hindi. So that is going to be the duty. But while doing so, union has also to ensure that Hindi's original identity should not get vanished, right? So that has been, all these things has been mentioned. So did union really or is union really doing these things? Is union really sincerely working for the promotion of Hindi? So to some extent you can say, because we do have the establishment of Department of Hindi under Ministry of Home Affairs, and every year whenever Ministry of Home Affairs does ask grants from the budget, you have huge amount of budget that is given to this Department of Hindi as well. Besides the Department of Hindi, these are the organization, or these are the committees or commission that you will notice, and this committee on Parliament on official languages, Kendriya Hindi Samiti. So these kind of institutions are working continuously round the clock for the promotion of Hindi. So this was all about all the articles that we do have in part 17 of Indian Constitution. Now the last content of this particular video, and that is official languages in India. You do have these 8 schedule I am talking about, right? So in 8 schedule, how many languages we do have? So until now we do have this 22 languages, but at the time of Constitution, when Constitution was being framed, initially the draft started with the 12 languages, and this 12 language draft that was prepared, that was on insistence of J.L. Nehru, who had initially asked someone from the Constituent Assembly to prepare this draft. Now, why this draft would have been prepared? Why do we have this 8 schedule? So this 8 schedule has been mentioned already into the conception of this official languages in India has already been envisioned in this article 344, right? So when we were talking about the creation of commission by the president in this article 344, do you remember when we were talking this article 344? So in article 344, when we were talking about that president after 5 years and after 10 years will be instituting a commission, right? And commission will have a chairman and the members. We did not discuss that point. So it will have members from those belonging to the 8th schedule language, right? So that this 8th schedule has already been the official language, not 8th schedule exactly, but the official languages has already been mentioned into this article 344. So why official languages would have come into the place? Why do you have these 14 languages at the time of commencement of the constitution? Why do you think that when we already have declared the official language, that the state legislature does have right to choose their official language, union government Hindi we already have declared, then English, continued use of English in official language act 1963 we already have chosen. So why do you need 22 or 14 at the time of commencement of the 14 official languages? So it was just to create a sense of national integration, and it was the secondary reason. The primary reason was just to have to recognize, see, we are, as I already told you, that we are a multilingual society, we are a multi-ethnic society, we are a multi-religious. So on the multi-religious front, we already have declared that in preamble, and our society is, as well, is secular, although you might argue, but right now we are not getting into that discussion, that yes, our society may to some extent, some elements may be communal. So I'm not getting into that debate right now. My focus right on this multilingual front. So if you have to keep this society, or if you have to keep this nation integrated on all these fronts, you will have to work around the clock, right? So respecting, right, you have recognized Hindi, you have recognized to the official language of union. About the English as well, to some extent you have given the recognition through this official language act 1963. Then to the state legislature you have given the rights, right? So at the national level, this 8th schedule was created recognizing this importance of 14 languages, right, just to have a sense of national integration. So as I already told you, that the initial draft did not have 14 languages, rather it had 12 languages. 2 languages due to the political consideration was added into that draft, and that finally became 14 languages. With time, after the commencement of constitution, right now this number has reached until 22, and there are demands from other section as well to include. There are 38 languages again that is in list, right? Languages like Angika, languages like Virginia language. There are many languages that are in list to be included in this particular. There are people, or there are a group of NGO that is demanding inclusion of other languages as well, but right now you do have these 22 languages, because this is factual, so I am not going to read all these things, right? You do have starting from the south. If you want to remember all these, you should not be remembering this from the factual point of view. You can start with the state. So you do have this Tamil, you do have Malayalam, you do have Kannada, you have Telugu, you do have in Goa Konkani, right? This Konkani as an official language was recognized very recently, that was in 2003. Along with Konkani, you have this Santhali, Bodo and Maithili. So 4 languages in 2003 were recognized or were included in this official language. So until 2003 you had these 18 languages, 4 languages. So we were moving somewhere in south, right? So you have these 5 languages we already have discussed. Then you do have this Maratha, then you have this Odissi, in Bengal you have this Bengali, Assamese, Manipuri, right? So all these languages you do have. Then you do have this Sanskrit, right? Although Sanskrit is not spoken, means just because I did not have any dedicated state to locate for this Sanskrit or Bodo or Santhali, right? So I have located this in whatever state that does not have any dedicated language. Like you do have Tamil Nadu, you have Tamil. So for those Santhali and Sanskrit or Sindhi, we did not have any what you call dedicated states. So Sanskrit I have located here, Santhali I have located here, Bodo I have located here. Along with that, you have this Maithili. Then in Uttar Pradesh, let us take Hindi, right? In Madhya Pradesh, again you had Hindi. Then you have this Nepali. Let us take again, although Uttarakhand, right? You have this Tarai area where Nepali is spoken. Then you have this Punjabi. Then you have this Kashmiri. Then in Rajasthan, I have placed Sindhi. In Gujarat, you have Gujarati, right? So in these manner you do have right now 22 languages, and by state, by associating with state, you can easily remember. Otherwise, if you will get a list that these 22 languages I'll have to remember, you would not be able to remember. So I try to associate those 22 languages with particular state, and you would be. So here you do have these legends, and with that particular legends you can associate different states, right? So these kind of things, right? So I hope on the 8th schedule as well you will have an idea on. Now we are wrapping up this lecture with this 8th schedule, and in last you do have these 4 MCQ that I expect you to attempt. So this is the first MCQ, second MCQ, third MCQ, and fourth MCQ. So these are the 4 MCQ that I expect you to attempt until we come up with the next lecture on the tribunal and public service. Till then, bye bye.